And I'll turn us over to Jon Taylor. You're on.
Welcome everybody. I'm excited to be here again today. I'm really excited about our topic. I wrote a note in my notes in the last webinar that we needed to talk about co-regulation, and I can't remember why now. So if you've been watching up to this point, maybe this will make a lot of sense for you. Maybe it won't. I'm just trusting my I'm trusting my note from before, even if I don't know why I wrote it down. So co-regulation. We will get to what that means in just a minute, but let's talk about the role of regulation in a relationship, the different configurations people have around regulation, and I guess I'll just put a spoiler out here. In my opinion, there is no bad or pathological orientation to regulating your feelings and emotions. It's a lot of a matter of timing and context. So what regulation means. When you go throughout your day, when you interact, especially with people that you rely on, your emotions and your feelings are a big part of that. Most of the time, we hope that we can stay within our window of tolerance, not too activated, not too depressed. We can kind of do this normal up and down. A lot of regulation for some folks, it happens automatically. So if you start to get upset, you might find yourself breathing deeply. I know two of my kids, when they start to feel tired and like too low, they do this like jerk thing. The baby does the jerk thing to keep herself awake. I have another son who gets pesky. He gets annoying because the regulation is too low. There's a lot of regulating we do on autopilot, and the goal is to keep the nervous system again in that gentle up and down. So when it comes to regulating your emotions, this is not to become Spock. This is not to become emotionless. It's to stay ahead of the curve of what ends up feeling overwhelming and out of control. So, at the basis of good regulation is an ability to know what's happening with your heartbeat. So if my heart is beating uncomfortably fast for the activity that I'm involved in or not involved in, that's a sign my emotions are high. And, utilizing breathing or walking or stretching to get your heart rate down, that's some regulation. I mentioned breathing. Regulation can also happen in talking to other people. You reach out to a friend when you're upset and you feel better after talking to them. It can happen in, gazing in the eyes of someone who is safe and affectionate with you. All of those are different modes of getting your body sensations and your feelings in a place where they're manageable, where they present options for you instead of driving the bus, as I like to say. So there's three main orientations toward regulation. And listen through these to which one might describe you the most. Most people have a preferred mode of regulation. This is important to know in relationships, not so you can hammer your partner for how they're wrong in their preferred mode, so that you can understand how to reach them best and get them to work collaboratively with you in a mode of regulation that works good for both. So the first we'll talk about is auto-regulation. So auto-regulation is very pro-self. It doesn't require another person to happen. We can use others in auto-regulation as a self-object. So for example, like I do this all the time when I've been in my home alone for too long, I'll turn on the radio and I won't, it has to be talk radio. I usually listen to NPR. I don't really follow the stories. I just like to hear a voice around. So that's using another as a self-object. It's your voice is soothing me, not you. It's not you I'm interested in. It's the sound of your voice. This can also be like people can, in extremes, people can do this with others' bodies. People can do this with, I call it trophy collecting. I want you around. I don't necessarily want to interact with you, but I want you around. Auto-regulation can be dissociative. So, when you look at people who do something that looks like a stimming behavior, like the rocking, the rubbing, and I'm not talking about like in autism spectrum stuff. I'm talking like I get in this zone and I'm doing this repetitive action. And that is overall, that's soothing. Like we mentioned here, autoregulation is not necessarily pro-relationship. It's focused on the self. It's focused on how I get myself to calm down and regulate without a lot of regard for its impact on others. Intensely anxious folks tend to overuse autoregulation. And it makes sense because if you're intensely anxious, one of the best things in the world to kick that anxiety up a few notches is to deal with other human beings, because all human beings are unpredictable and a mystery to us. So anxious people will rely a lot on autoregulation because it's not risky, because you can provide the safety and stability for yourself pretty quick. The next mode that we'll talk about, orientation, is external regulation. So this is where we're regulated by another. So it can look interactive, but it lacks mutuality, meaning it's not going back and forth. And it lacks simultaneity, meaning we're both benefiting from this. So a really good example of external regulation is when you vent. To the person venting, it can feel great. And there is a difference, I think, between talking to myself out loud, which I do plenty of, and having someone pay attention while I vent. Having someone pay attention while I vent does often feel better to me than just, muttering under my breath or talking out loud. So the external relationship, or the external regulation, it can be relationship supportive. It's definitely self-supportive. There can be, when you're externally regulated, you can have an over focus on your partner or on the person who's regulating you. So are you really listening to me? I think for both folks who struggle with addiction and their partners, especially early in recovery, there's a lot of external regulating going on. I wouldn't relapse as much if my partner didn't XYZ. That's actually that's an external regulation cry. If you would be better to me, I would do better. Whether that's fair to ask is a different issue entirely, as we're talking about here. That's just a focus on something external. Or for the partner, when my partner gets sober and in recovery, then I can be okay. That's an external regulation focus. I need this outside of me to change in order for the inside of me to feel okay. And again, I want to reiterate, in all of these orientations to regulation, there's nothing pathological. Not one of these is bad. They're just different. Like I said, it's a matter of time and place and how they work. So the third orientation we would call interactive regulation. So this is what external regulation mimics, but in reality, it's pro-social, it's pro-relational. So it's mutual. We're both doing this. And it's simultaneous. We're both benefiting real time, every moment. We're both benefiting from this. So interactive regulation can be eye to eye, face to face, skin to skin. That's a very interactive regulation stance. It requires some self-regulation under stress conditions. And here's why: because if you push, everybody has their stress limit that if you push them to and beyond, they do not think about other people. The kindest person in the world, you can put them under enough stress where they will collapse and they'll be totally internally and self-focused. So in order to be in a place where you can do interactive regulation, where there is that ability, you have to be able to regulate an amount of your own stress personally in order to have that as an option. So some examples of what interactive regulation looks like. So it's mutually managed. So both of us have a say in this. So I'm thinking about couples that I work with in recovery. They talk a lot about what's the right amount of space and what's the right amount of time for us together right now. Couples in recovery, especially early on, we're not talking ideally. We're talking about, like, what can we tolerate? What can we behave well in? What can we actually deliver good things to each other before we unravel a bit? And I'll see couples who focus on that throughout recovery. They get better at it. They build muscle for it. But it always remains mutual. So it's also mutual around the method. So if I like touch and you don't, it's not mutual for me to say, well, touch is what makes sense for me, and that's what I do, and you should like it or leave it. The mutuality around method is, let's talk about what works well for both of us. So I like touch, you don't. So touch probably isn't the place we're going to go to get regulation, but maybe walking together, maybe doing a hobby together, maybe listening to music together, maybe talking face to face. That works really well. So when you have interaction or interactive regulation going on, both parties understand the right mode and timing because it's been discussed. And usually those discussions come out of trial and error. Well, we tried it this way and it failed spectacularly, so we had to learn a little more and get intentional with each other. It's also mutually intentional. I may not feel like checking in with you at the end of the day and sharing feelings, but I know it's good for me and I know it's good for you, so I intentionally do this. I don't just reach out to you mindlessly to compliment you because I want sex, or to hold your hand because I want something from you later. This is really about, I want you to feel good now. I want me to feel good now. I want this to be a safe container for both of us. It's also intersubjective. So this is one of those words that comes up in my field all the time that I'm like, oh yeah, I know what that means, but I actually had to look up the definition to make sure I knew. And basically what it means is that two people share the perception and the experience. It's like, it's not two minds becoming one. This is made up of two minds, two bodies. So what this means in secure functioning language is that it's good for both of us. This is something that has to include both of us. We both have to benefit here. So it's not about my turn, your turn. It's every step we make, every move we make is good for both of us. Nobody is left hanging at any point in this. Another way of looking at that, or another part of intersubjective, is we're both experts on what's happening here. So again, I think about couples in recovery. It is not interactively regulatory, or it's not interactive regulation when somebody says to the other, this is just the way that it's going to need to be. I don't care what's going on with you. Now, there's an asterisk by that. For those of you who have betrayed, and we've talked about this before, it's a good idea to have things in balance for a while and to have the focus be on your partner, to demonstrate your investment, to demonstrate that you're serious about not hurting them again, and to demonstrate and build your abilities to care well for your partner. Because in addiction, you've proved all of those things are not on your radar, you're not capable, you're not going to do. But I would also say with that, like when an addicted partner says, I'm overwhelmed, I need to take a break, that has to be treated like real data. It has to be treated like a reality. If you are the boy or the girl who cries wolf with that you take breaks to get out of it and you never come back, you will lose your credibility to be able to do that. So know that when we speak up and say, this is the experience I'm having, it has to be real, it has to be true. And in order to continue in the interactive regulation, you have to be willing to come back after you call a timeout or after you take a break. Interactive regulation can be both verbal and nonverbal. And in my book, when interactive regulation is at its best, it's both. We're not just doing things that feel nice, we're talking about it. We're getting real-time feedback. We're interested in that. So some examples of interactive regulation: repair, friendly eye gazing, smile, attunement. Part of interactive regulation. So the way I see these, like there's a time and a place for each. Sometimes the interactive regulation is agreeing to part ways for a minute. I think I've shared this before. Last spring, I came home and, I get in the door and I said, what are we up to? And my wife said, you're going to go on a bike ride. And I said, oh, why? And she said, I don't think you're ready to be at home. I think you could use a bike ride. I didn't disagree. And the interactive part was we had a powwow about what was being felt and what was needed, what we could both handle, and we made a plan. And I went off and I auto-regulated on the bike. I guess you could say that's some external regulation too, because I use the bike, I use nature, things outside of me. And I came back and we were interactive again. I asked you all to think about which mode you might be more natural at. Now I'm going to ask you to think about how you use each one and when you tend to use it and whether it's helpful or not. So for example, I think autoregulation has a huge place in overall relationship regulation and overall mood regulation, because you have to know you have to know how you tick. You have to know what the feelings and sensations are in your body and the thoughts are in your mind when you are feeling overwhelmed, or when you're feeling hopeless or anxious or stressed. That doesn't just come from people giving you feedback. That also comes from you taking some time with yourself. I've interacted with kids, both my own and others, who are masters at this. There's a little boy. He's friends with both of my sons. He's on the autism spectrum, and we had him over at our house one day, and I found him underneath the coffee table. He'd cleared the books out of the little shelf under there, and he was laying there, and I said, what's going on? And he said, I'm just feeling a little overwhelmed, and when I sit under a table, it makes me feel better. And I was like, more power to you, man. Like, that's great. I was in awe that he, at that age, that he knew that about himself and he was willing to do that. That's good time and place for auto-regulation. External regulation. When I think about addiction recovery, this has me thinking of triggers and cravings. Triggers and cravings are things that come in, or triggers are things that come in from the outside. Cravings are things that happen within us. Both of those are really good candidates for some external regulation. Picking up the phone and talking with a support person. Hey, I have this really stupid idea in my head. Here's how I want to relapse. Let's talk it through. Or for you partners out there, my spouse is doing XYZ again, and I'm really, really upset about it. Someone gives you a chance to vent, and then maybe there's some interactive regulation going on in there too. So who you talk to and why matters a lot in the external regulation. A lot of couples will take a shortcut, or they'll try to do at least energy with as little energy expenditure as possible, and they'll go to each other immediately for the external regulation. I think being ambushed with external regulation, or not having that be the explicit agreement, for the person who's being approached to do the regulating, that can be really threatening. That can be really overwhelming. So it's a good idea in your recovery to have some good external regulators and set the agreement up. I'm working with a guy right now who part of his morning routine is he starts every day off by scheduling phone calls with support people for the day. And he'll look at his schedule and say, 2:00 is probably going to be a rough time for me because of what leads up to that. I need to call at 2. And he'll send, the message out, and he'll get somebody to agree to talk to him at 2. Great use of external regulation. When it comes to external regulation, like venting, don't try to make this a two-way arrangement. You vent, I vent. Because when we're in a place where we're trying to get the external regulation, or, that's what's going on for us, it's hard to shift gears really, really quick. So make sure there's an agreement. And again, you'll come by these agreements in your relationships by making mistakes, but make sure there's an agreement when somebody's venting. How do we handle it? How do we know that you've gotten everything that you need, you're calmed down? And then what's the agreement of when we circle back and say, okay, now how are we doing? How are we both doing? A lot of the couples that I work with feel upstaged and feel threatened by their partner, who immediately starts piling on with their own stuff. That needs intentional interactive regulation. My turn, your turn doesn't work very well when you're doing external regulation. And then interactive regulation, like I said, it's all about time and place. So the first thing I'd say about this is negotiate the hell out of how you're going to interactively regulate. Understand time, place, understand what's good for you, what's good for me. Set up routines and rituals that work for your coupleship, not just for you as individuals. This is something like everything that's interactive with another person. You may get lucky some days and just fall into a great rhythm with each other, but likely that's not going to happen often. So don't count on it. Really plan it, really negotiate it. Talk about what's possible. Are you open for touch? No, I can't do touch right now. And don't take that as a feat. There's a lot of other senses you can use. Well, does sight work for you? What if we looked at each other? Can you do talking? Are there sounds? Are there smells? Do we need to eat a meal together? Like there's lots of possibilities. So talk about what's possible. Talk about what's necessary. What do we actually need to be in a good spot with each other? I'm thinking about a couple I worked with a while ago. They were both more avoidant. And they had it in their heads that in order to be a good couple, they had to spend a ton of time together. And they would do really well like the first 30 minutes to an hour, and then they would start fighting. And when we got down to the bottom of it, they both talked about, I really love the first part of spending time together, but then I get stressed and I kind of want to draw back a bit. And they made this agreement that they were going to take their connecting time in like hour-long chunks, and they were going to evaluate, you up for more, or is it time for a break? And that worked like magic for them, because they weren't trying to do the gold standard, this is the best. They were doing what was necessary for them, what was good for them. Define. So be talking a ton about the rituals you set up. Okay, what exactly is our ritual? When do we do this? Again, you can't coast on the assumption that we have an understanding. Human beings have a hard time thinking outside of themselves. So if you make a mutual agreement, have ways that you can come back to it again and again to learn the agreement, to really get it internalized. Practice the bits of interactive regulation that you can. Again, there's like gold standard, and then there's what we're capable of right now. I think the feeling of collaboration and cooperation early in recovery, we're not great at this, so there's not a lot that we can do, but what we do, we try to do together. That can go a long way in being able to build trust and confidence. Again, it's not about perfecting it, it's about working on it together, if that's what you choose. Scott talks about plantar fasciitis at the beginning of this. This made me think of like, it's like stretching a locked up muscle group. I've been in physical therapy before for back issues, foot issues, and it always astounds me like how simple the exercises are. Very rarely have I gotten an exercise from my physical therapist that like would take 45 minutes of my day. It's like, do this for 3 minutes, 4 times a day. Really simple, accessible stuff. In the beginning, it's hard to do because of how things are locked up. Over time, I always get surprised at how effective it is. Just a little bit here, a little bit there, consistently can really bring back some movement and some life to some areas that were locked up. So when it comes to interactive regulation, I know that most of you in here, it's probably not an option to do a ton of it. It's probably not safe. And that's okay. If any part of it is safe, even just a little bit for a few minutes, nurture what you have. Do that by mutual agreement. You'll be glad you did in the long run, because as trust and confidence does return, you'll also have this undergirding structure for your relationship where you've been practicing taking care of each other. You've been practicing really supporting each other. So that is co-regulation.
I'm blown away. You often blow me away. This is one of those weeks where you have just blown me away. I don't even know where to begin. I'm looking at myself, and my natural tendency is to auto-regulate, but there are times when I want to vent. And I subconsciously know that I want to vent and I do not want you venting back. So I will actually, I have a couple people that I vent with and I call them and I say, I need to vent. Can you listen to me vent? And they get it. They're like, just listen. And at the end, they might say, do you want any feedback? And I can say yes or no. And if I say no, they're all like, okay, do you feel better? I'm like, yeah, I feel better. They get that it's a one-way street when I'm venting. And then, but what I'm thinking is different situations require different forms of regulation for me. My go-to is auto-regulation. I want to handle it myself. My next go-to is external if I'm feeling bad or I'm angry. But if I'm feeling good, but maybe getting out of my window of tolerance because and need to, regulate, I like interactive. I like to share it. And when you were talking about it, you mentioned that touch is not for everyone. I'm so glad you mentioned that because everybody wants to like touch you when you're feeling good. Touch me. I am not regulated yet. After I'm regulated, I love physical contact with people, but not when I'm out of my window of tolerance. But it's interesting when I'm feeling bad, I either want to auto-regulate or external. When I'm feeling good, I actually want interactive, just not too interactive. No touching, thank you. So that's just an observation, but a question is, when you started talking, I thought, well, addiction is sort of a maladaptive auto-regulation.
Totally.
But I'm not sure, is it an auto-regulation or is it avoiding auto-regulation? Like,
if you look neurologically at what relapse does or use does, it is regulatory.
Okay.
So like, for example, you take like masturbation. Masturbation is a really effective number. Like, I think it's up there with like THC and other, amounts. If you look neurologically, it does a good job. You're right to say it's maladaptive. Now, that doesn't mean that every addict is an auto-regulator. I think this is where there's some difference between like sex addicts and porn addicts. I think a lot of like pure porn addicts, these are more auto-regulatory, like I want to avoid other people. A lot of sex addicts, I would say, are external regulators. It's the partner, not the relationship. It's the having another body to serve me, not have a relationship with this person. Auto-regulation. I think a lot of addictions are the poster child for auto-regulation.
Yeah. I mean, certainly for me. I also wanted to point out, and I have a question attached to this, that the window of tolerance, our window of emotional tolerance, everybody is aware that there are certain bad emotions that we struggle with and we get out of our window of tolerance and we behave badly and, we need some regulation. We tend to forget that there's an upper level of the window of tolerance and we can get out of it with good emotions. And this came up in one of the online work groups I teach. I think it was my sex addiction group. The other day, one of the guys, I have them check in before we start the actual class. And it had been his wife's birthday. And they had gone out and had a lovely dinner and, did the walk through the park and went home and they had, made love as opposed to, having sex. And it was really intimate and connected. And she drifted off to sleep and he went and looked at porn. And I was like, you were out of your window of tolerance. You were actually feeling too good. I mean, is that what it is? And what can a couple do? What can a couple do to prevent that? I mean, what could have happened to co-regulate?
Much of the time when I see that regulating out of a positive feeling state, it's actually a feeling of hopelessness that comes up. This is just going to end. And, folks that I see that will sabotage like that, that's what that is I'm putting this to an end on my terms. I don't want to risk waking up and feeling distant from you or being surprised I feel distant from you. I'm going to move away from you now. So it's actually regulating. Like, hope doesn't feel good for everybody, especially if you have a history of that being dashed. a good strategy for that. You have to get to know what the feelings are underneath positive connection. I'm really afraid this is going to end. You can't just, and I'll see a lot of the guys that I work with in that situation. They want their partner to reassure them all the time, which if you just look at it objectively, that's not a terrible way to go. But it's also, remember, if we're going to do interactive regulation, if we're going to help each other, we both have to be a part of it. So that means you have to be up on what you're feeling and what you fear and what you're anxious about, and you have to communicate that to your partner if they have a shot at even helping you with that. For some guys that I work with, and Dr. Adams actually uses this in our enmeshment workshops. He shows clips of the show The Big Bang Theory. There's a character on there that's enmeshed with his mother, and one episode opens to a scene where he and his girlfriend are in bed. They've clearly, just had sex, and he, sighs and says, "Oh man, I love this. I could stay here forever." Or she says that, and he says, "Oh, me too." And then he says, "So what you think, another 5-10 minutes?" And, you can just see the antsiness, which, for those of you who have struggled with enmeshment, what that feels like in those intimate moments. Sometimes that, we call it contact maintenance, the ability to be close for a long amount of time, that's hard to do too. So again, by pre-arrangement, you guys might have to build in, like, we do have a great day, we make love. That's good in connecting. You might also need some time by yourself after that to bring yourself back together intentionally. Again, if you think the gold standard is, well, I sit around, I wait around, and now we're magically connected for each other. For some people, that's going to be really anxiety provoking, and they might need to auto-regulate a bit. They might need to come into their own world a little bit to feel completely grounded. And then it's, from my own world, I can come and go. So there's lots of options for that, but it's like you said, Scott, it's a pretty common thing, and it's not just bad emotions that we feel anxious or fearful about.
Yeah, I like the way you explain that. It reminds me of one of Brene Brown's terms, foreboding joy. She talks about, after she had her first child, she would stand in the doorway and watch the baby sleep and have horrible thoughts about all the bad things that might happen. It was this joyful experience and terror at the same time. So I like, how you explain that. Like, again, just takes me out of my window of tolerance. So okay, let's jump into the Q&A. What does a healthy sex cycle look between me and my sex addict husband? We're a few years into recovery now, and cold shoulder, isolation, blaming, minimizing often happens off and on with my sex addict husband. Then we will have a few good days and engage sexually with each other. This happens over and over and over, week after week. Should I wait for stability before engaging sexually? God, this is practically the question I just asked, but a little different. I mean,
I would say, in the data that you provided there, the healthy sex cycle would have to be like, you have to really want it, and not just in the moment, but as I'm looking at it, it sounds like you're maybe recognizing, here's our cycle, this is what our relationship is made up now. In the context of that, how much do you want sex? If the answer to that is no, or I don't know, then you have to honor that. That's where the health comes from. It's not a prescription in how often, or what does it look like. It's first and foremost, am I here for it as it is? Can I bring my whole self to this? If not, reconsider some boundaries, reconsider I need to see some things happen because I don't feel good about what we're doing, or the context of how we're doing this.
And from I'm assuming it's a sex addict husband who pulls closer and pulls further apart. Is this a window of tolerance issue? And is there a way for the addict to regulate and smooth it out, maybe?
Yeah, possibly. From that standpoint, the let's have sex, that could be an external regulating thing. I'm not feeling great. Relationships I see with this kind of rhythm to it, there's often not a lot else that they have going on that again gets them in that safe container together. We can make things feel good and safe outside of sex too. In that collaborative mode, if this is a cycle that's hurting both, well, let's talk about some other ways that we can feel close and we can feel connected in addition to having sex with each other. And let's build up our tolerance all the way around, so that we don't yo-yo as extremely as I'm hearing there.
Yeah. Okay. This question is a little confusing, but I'm gonna. My sex addict husband's family of origin is they lack integrity. They lie, cheat, deceive, get you before you get them kind of people. So knowing that integrity issues are common among people with sex addiction, is that increased with a mother enmeshed man who comes from a family like that?
The way that it's maybe a little unique with a mother enmeshed man is oftentimes his motive for whether it's deceit or not being committed is he thinks he's helping everybody by saying yes to everything. He thinks he's helping the situation by being agreeable, even if he has no intention of following through. And as I work with these guys, when they start realizing that, it's almost this it's this moment of tragedy. The thing I thought that I was doing that was so good for relationship is actually doing the most damage. So, that question of like honesty and integrity, that's always an interesting thing for me, because I think there's always a lot to be parsed out. In my book, there's a motivation for everything that people do. That's what I say about enmeshment is the way that the guy perceives it is usually not just I'm getting away with something. Like he really thinks he's doing a good job. Unfortunately, he doesn't realize that he can't take care of everybody, and he needs to let go of some of his commitments to care for, so that he can focus on the commitments he really wants to care for.
Yeah. My husband is a sex addict in recovery for 10 months. I have a strong, self-confident personality and was the major breadwinner in the family. My husband has low self-esteem, but projects confidence. I'm realizing he changes his story every time he talks to a new person. He's afraid to tell me his needs or negotiate win-wins for our relationship. I've asked for our whole marriage, and he just pretended he was fine with what I want. Is it possible for him to ever develop self-esteem to feel equal to me?
Sure. Yeah, sure, it's possible. If you haven't already, get yourselves in seats in front of a therapist that you can do that in front of, that can see that, and can help him and you to unpack real time what happens, why is this going on, and is this really the best way to get what we want. I think committed relationships can be a gift in developing self-confidence. I think of myself and like the view I had of myself upon meeting my spouse, and like the gifts that she's given me in self-confidence and assurance and even competency. I think that committed relationships at their best really help both parties to grow and develop into the very best being that they can be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Many addicts come into recovery needless and wantless. We have childhood trauma, and we just shut our needs and wants down because they're not going to be met. So, and then we avoid our needs. We escape through an addiction. So we come into recovery needless and wantless, and that's kind of our personality style, but we can earn security through a healthy relationship, through actually, taking a risk and saying, I really need to be vulnerable right now, and having somebody respond empathetically instead of by ridiculing us or ignoring us or making it our fault, which is usually what we experienced as a child. But how is that first step taken to become vulnerable with the person who can hurt me the most? If I'm in a relationship with Jon and I'm this needless, wantless person who really is neither, but I project that way. How can I say, John, I really need something? Because he's the person who can hurt me the most now. It's scary.
Yeah.
So how do I do that?
This is where I think like couples therapy is really, really important. Because one of the things I'm trained to do as a couples therapist is not just explain what a good relationship is, but to prove to you where you don't have one. And it kind of sounds mean, but the best motivator for change is pain. And part of my job, especially early on with couples in recovery, is I have to show them where they're actually hurting and not let them just gloss over it. And I don't do that by lecture. I do that by, it happens in the moment, and then I get to work with both parties together. So what are you doing, and how is that working out? How has it worked out in the past? Oh, it's terrible. You're not getting what you want. Why are you still doing that then? Why do you think that's effective? And it really like changing that. You have to come to the threshold of pain where, there's a lot of pain. Like, first of all, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know how to solve my problems. I'm that step one, I'm powerless. The other really scary thing you have to come to is I don't have any better ideas. This is the best I can do, and it's not great. That is the only place where a person who's been living in that kind of denial or that kind of detachment from reality, that's the only place where they start considering updating their reality. So there's ways you can bring each other to their, similar to how I do it as a therapist. I don't ever do that maliciously, and I don't ever gloat. I do that with so much kindness and so much love, because when the pain starts to hit, what I want that couple to feel is, I'm here to help you if you'll start from a real place. I can help you if you start from a real place. And in partnership, sometimes we instinctively cut our partners off from that experience of pain and recognition, because we're not monsters. We don't want to see each other hurt. So allowing for the pain, allowing real discussions around the dysfunction, that's how that starts to change.
So this is something that popped into my head as you were talking, and I'm not sure if I'm correct. We can over-regulate our partner. We can prevent them from feeling the pain that they need to feel.
Yeah, it's actually an external regulation. We think we're helping our partner, we're really helping ourselves. I don't know what to do when you feel powerless or chaotic, so I'm going to keep you out of that, because then I don't have to feel that. We use our partner's emotion and doing well as an external regulatory object. All right, you're happy, you're fine. I'm happy, I'm fine.
Yeah, I don't want to. I feel pain when you feel pain, so I'm going to prevent you from feeling pain, even though you need to feel pain to grow through the stuff that's. It's that catch-22. So okay. I feel like my partner's mood goes way south after the first couple of morning interactions. It's like he's eager to cling to the first negative speck of interaction. I feel like I need to avoid morning interactions because he blames me and typically says out loud, "There goes the day." My knee-jerk response is, "Really? The entire day is shot? All or nothing?" Yes, some topics are part of our roller coaster, and we need to express our concerns as we recover, but these events are singular. So suggestions. Great question.
Yeah, this is a great situation to start putting some rituals and routines in. Transitions are hard for couples. Waking up is a transition. Getting ready to leave the house for the day if you work outside your home, that's a transition. And transitions are hard because there's abandonment and reunion and all of that. It might be easier for your husband to leave for the day being cross with you, rather than facing, I hate that I have to leave my family and my house for the day, or whatever that looks like. So Stan Tatkin calls them launchings and landings. Having routines around how you come together and leave each other works great. in avoiding this. If we always have a pit we fall into, well, let's construct a bridge over that pit, and we just take the bridge. So for example, mornings are a time that's really easy for me to feel chaotic, and I can feel chaotic with the lack of structure. I can also feel chaotic trying to put too much structure in. So right now, the thing that starts my day off right, I wake up and I make sure the dogs get fed, and I make sure the tortoise gets fed, and I make sure my kids and my wife get fed. And that's all I focus on in the morning. And it turns out that, when it comes time to go to work, I feel like I've made a valuable contribution to the place that I'm going to be leaving for the day, and that I often feel guilty about leaving for the day. I've connected with my dogs that I often feel like they don't get enough of my time and attention now. And I feel good for the day because I've had a good breakfast. I feel good about how I'm sending my kids off to school. It's a routine that avoids a lot of pitfalls. So you might want to talk with your partner about, let's talk about what our morning would ideally look like, and let's put some routines and rituals in place where we give each other a better start.
I love this next question. My partner sometimes has recall or pop-ups. I love that term, pop-ups, which is basically euphoric recall of previous acting out or fantasy when he reaches out to me sexually. The question is that due to enmeshment or intimacy avoided? And I will say, and if not those, then what?
Right. Oh man, I would need a lot more history to know. The timing, what I hear the focus on the question, the timing of when this happens is certainly curious, right? In the mode that we're talking about today with regulation, like I said, talking about auto-regulation, our body does a lot automatically. And for those who are fantasy prone, that is one of the roles that I see fantasy play in auto-regulation. It's like the mind starts playing this video at the times where we're most anxious. A lot of fantasy prone people I know, they're big auto-regulators because that's what fantasy is. I'm constructing this world around me that keeps all of the bad things away. Yeah, I couldn't tell you why it's happening or where it comes from, but it sounds like the mechanism is there's feelings that come up around being intimate and connected that, like Scott pointed out, not every good feeling feels great, or not every good feeling comes without fear. Folks who are fantasy prone, I genuinely feel bad because there's those who use it addictively to escape, and then there's those where it's like a knee-jerk reaction. And those that's a knee-jerk reaction, I feel really bad for, because it's very, very hard. It's very hard to break that cycle and to start feeling safe and comfortable, confident in your safety when you're getting intimate.
Yeah, and let's take this one step further, because I hear about this from the addict side. I teach and work with the addicts, not just reaching out sexually, which has all the fear and the scariness, but then engaging sexually with the partner, and the recall and the pop-ups are coming in. Normally that's, well, I'm going to ask, why does that happen and what can be done about it? Like during sex, and I'm having recall and pop-ups, and I want to be with my partner. I'm trying to repair this relationship.
That neurological principle, what fires together wires together. It's like hallucinogens do this, especially they store in fatty tissue, and you can have effects of hallucinogens months and even years after you last used, because of how it's stored in the body. This fantasy can be the same thing. There's a sensation or there's a sight, it triggers a memory network, and that's how your mind works, is this domino action of neurons. So what can be done about it in a moment? The first thought that came to me is, if any of you think that you are that fantastic at sex that you can't interrupt the act to attend to yourself, you might be a little delusional. Whatever it was you're going to finish is not as important as you stopping and getting present. And it's almost this meditative act. Meditation is not about focusing and being quiet. It's actually about bringing the mind back when it wanders. And that baseline that you bring it back to, we can actually see that correspond with a thickening of the neuronal pathways, which cranial nerve is it? The dorsal vagal nerve will actually thicken with meditative practice, because you are calling your mind back when it runs away, and you're making sure it comes back. And then, yeah, it might run away again, but then you call it back. What I would say can be done in those moments is stop what you're doing. Don't go on as if things are normal. Whatever your agreement is with your partner about how to talk about that or when to talk about it, address that, and then get present again. If you want to be present, call your mind back and help it get present. And if you get going again and your mind wanders off, patiently stop and get present again. What you'll see over time is that ability to stay present and steer it back. It's like when I'm training, one of my dogs, eventually they get the message, oh, you want me to be right by you. Your brain will eventually do the same thing if you'll stop and attend to it, not just focus on preventing.
Yeah, and yeah, fires together, wires together. That is what happened. I'm glad you put it that way. This is from somebody. Well, this morning I saw my wife face to face for the first time since she demanded divorce 3 weeks ago. He's been experiencing high levels of stress and anxiety for that, related to that. Today, they managed to agree on all of the financials for the split, and he managed this without a meltdown, like happened when he was a kid, or without isolating. And he has a history of severe financial trauma from his dad. So he's wondering why he was able to agree to the financial split of this divorce, which he's very traumatized about. Has he managed to self-regulate, or is something else going on here?
Yeah, I'd have to talk to you more to find out. The phrase that comes to mind is the work you've been doing has showed up to help you. That's one of the things that I love. There's a lot I do as a therapist that I feel like is intentional. I want to see this outcome, but there's always secondary gains. I didn't even know we were working on that. And, all of a sudden, like, you have this ability, you're handling this differently. And, the big takeaway I would encourage you to look at is whatever you're doing to address that is helping. You just had an experience that should have debilitated you, and it didn't. It brings to mind that promise from AA. We'll intuitively handle that which used to baffle us. I love that as a North Star for recovery. It's not about being lost anymore. And sometimes we don't know why we're not lost, but we're just not lost, and that feels great, and you can celebrate that.
And if there is a delayed meltdown, what can this individual do to prep for that, and to handle that?
Yeah, that's a great question. If there's a delayed meltdown, first plan on there could be, don't think you're out of the woods. So you might want to reach out to support people and say, hey, I just had this big conversation. I'm not feeling it in the moment. I might really, feel it. Watch yourself closely, just like you would with a dog or a kid that ate something they're not supposed to, and they might start vomiting. Like, just watch close, and maybe set yourself up with some extra time and space that can buffer and hold some of that. If you do need to melt down, give yourself the next little while, give yourself some time off of responsibility and duty, so that whatever does come up, you can fully attend to, you can fully be present with.
John, do you have time for one more quick one?
Sure.
Okay, because this is the last one. This is in the chat feature. This is from a male addict who's in a relationship. He's looking for practical suggestions to be more in tune with his fears and emotions. He says, many times I'm not fully aware that I've become dysregulated. Usually my partner notices before I do. So any thoughts there?
Yeah, if you have a partner that's willing to collaborate with you and say, hey, something seems off, you could start by asking them, what do you notice when I'm off? And they may say, well, your jaw always gets tight. And you may, oh my gosh, yeah, it does. I grind my teeth. It starts to build, we call it interoception, the ability to feel what's going on inside your body. That starts with people who observe you. That's, I would say, the most efficient way to do it. So if your partner's willing, or the people who notice, ask them, what do you notice when I'm starting to get, wound up, and try to locate it in your body, try to feel it. You could also do I call it doing the autopsy. After the fact, go back and look at what happened. That will help your ability to intervene move up in the timeline. A lot of times we're dealing with, I can only, deal post-mortem after it's happened. But if you keep up that practice, you'll start to notice this inner observer, this voice inside of you that will say, hey, this feels like that time when this was the outcome, or, you're getting sweaty again, you're getting tense again. That internal narrator, that inner observer is a really, really big part of being able to stay regulated. When I exercise, I have to remind myself this. My heart rate is raising, and sometimes I'll have to say that's not a bad thing. You can handle it. You actually you wanted this to happen. But that inner observer, without value or judgment on it. So I'm feeling tense right now. I'm feeling anxious right now. That kind of stuff helps a lot.
Yeah, I remember John is in Salt Lake City. Somebody just asked where you are. We're outside of Salt Lake City. I remember when I was early in recovery, I went to visit my parents, and my mother looked at me and said, "Do you need a meeting?" And now I can actually, many years later, which is not the nicest way to say you're being an asshole, but but it worked. But now I can recognize and say, I can go, I need a meeting, and she'll go, okay, So yeah, I've gotten better. You will get better at it with work. So. Thank you, Jon, for running a little long. Great topic today. Great questions from everybody. Thank you. We'll be back second week of next month. Anything you want to say to take us out, Jon?
No, thanks for the great questions, and I look forward to seeing you guys in a few weeks.
Yeah. All right. See you, everybody.